I call this meeting to order. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Welcome to meeting number 22 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage.
To the order of reference of Tuesday, March the 1st, 2022, the committee is meeting on the study of the main estimates for the fiscal year ending March the 31st, 2023. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021, members are attending in person in the room and others are remotely using the Zoom application. As per the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on March the 10th, 2022, all those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask. I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference.
Point of order?
Yes, Kevin.
Yeah, sorry, Madam
Yes,
Chair.
Mr. Wall.
It's only been 5 minutes and 14 seconds since the vote recording in the House of Commons, and we wish to inform the Chair we're still missing one on our side, and they have up to 10 minutes after the vote to get in here. So I just
I'm sorry, Mr. Wall. We're going according to the clerk saying that everyone was there, but we will wait until your member comes in.
Okay, thank you.
Did you want to suspend the meeting, Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
I would like to open the meeting. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Welcome to meeting number 22 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage.
In order of reference, of Tuesday, March the 1st, 2022, the committee is meeting on the study of main estimates for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021, members attending in person in the room and those who are remotely using Zoom. As per the directive of the Board of Internal Economy, those in the room should wear a mask. I want to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon at the bottom of your screen to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice, obviously at the bottom of your screen, of either floor English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be directed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. And for those on Zoom, please use the hand icon. And I now would like to welcome our witnesses. For the first hour of this meeting, our witnesses will be the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, CRTC. And they are, the witnesses for this body are Ian Scott, Chairperson and Chief Executive Officer, Scott Hutton, Chief of Consumer Research and Communications, Claude Doucet, Secretary General, Valerie Huot, Director General Finance and Administrative Services. You have 5 minutes to present, and then there would be open questions and answers from the members of Parliament. So I would like whomever you choose to begin to present, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente, un rappel au règlement.
Call to order. Madam Chair, I would like for us to deal with an issue as the meeting begins, to know what we can expect and to know how much time we have. I'm being told that committees can use their 2 hours in as much as we don't end after 8 p.m. Am I correct? Am I correct with that?
D'accord. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. So we should begin. Whomever would be speaking for the CRTC, you have 5 minutes.
Thank
Please
you.
Begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members, for inviting us to appear before you. You've already introduced my colleagues. I would like to say that we do indeed welcome the chance to appear here as part of your study of the main estimates for 2022 and 2023 as they relate to the CRTC and to Bill C-11. Before we address the specific element of the main estimates, I thought it might be helpful to provide a little context for my remarks. And in particular, I wanted to offer a quick overview of how the CRTC is funded and how the monies assigned to implement our new responsibilities under C-11 would be used. The Commission has access to 2 sources of funding, appropriation and revenues. On top of that, there is some statutory funding that is allocated to the Commission to cover certain employee benefit plans. Now, the first category, appropriation, is earmarked for expenses related to Canada's anti-spam legislation and the voter contact registry activities. In addition, the CRTC was granted temporary appropriation funding for expenses related to Bill C-11's implementation on a preliminary basis. Appropriations, however, represent only about 13% of the CRTC's overall funding. The bulk of that funding, 87%, comes from fees paid directly by the companies it regulates. I'm sure they feel a great joy in paying for their regulation. The Commission collects fees under the authority of the Telecom Act, and the telecommunications fee regulations and the unsolicited telecommunications fees regulation, as well as under the Broadcasting Act as set out under the broadcasting regulations. Treasury Board authorizes the CRTC to use revenues from these fees to offset operating expenses incurred in the same fiscal year. I should note and clarify that Broadcasting Part 1, license fees, telecommunications fees, and unsolicited telecom fees are used to cover expenses related to our regulatory activities. However, Part 2, broadcasting license fees, accrue to the government's consolidated revenue fund. They do not come to the Commission. They do not fund our regulatory costs for broadcasting-related activities or support the Commission's activities in any other way. Excuse me. The committee, I am sure, will have an opportunity to conduct a study of C11 in the near future, and we very much look forward to appearing before you again to speak at greater length about the legislation. For now, I'd simply like to say that we certainly, as a commission, welcome the tabling of the bill, given the pressing need to modernize the Broadcasting Act and the CRTC's powers, and to clarify the Commission's jurisdiction regarding online broadcasters. Comme vous le savez, peut-être aussi le budget de...
As you may also be aware, Budget 2022 proposed to provide the CRTC with $8.5 million over 2 years to establish a new regime to ensure that Canadian news outlets are fairly compensated by digital platforms. Madam Chair, Bill C-18 proposes a mechanism to ensure that Canadian news outlets receive fair compensation from the digital platforms that share and distribute their work. The legislation would require platforms that generate revenues from publication of news content on their sites to negotiate with news businesses and reach fair commercial deals. Bill C-18 proposes to entrust the CRTC with 5 main functions in overseeing this activity. It would play an administrative role, registering news businesses that meet the legislation's eligibility criteria, and assessing whether digital platforms meet the Act's exemption criteria. 2. Oversee negotiation and mediation and maintain a public list of external arbitrators agreed upon by both the platforms and publishers. 3. Deal with complaints of undue preference or unjust discrimination filed by news businesses against platforms. 4. Contract an independent auditor to publish an annual report on the total value of commercial agreements and other key information. And 5, establish regulations to collect fees similar to those paid by broadcasters and telecommunications service providers. The Commission requires additional funds to prepare for these new responsibilities so that we are ready to implement the legislation in an expedient manner should Bill C-11 and C-18 receive royal assent.
Either bill receive royal assent, we will move quickly to launch public consultations in order to gather views and evidence from Canadians and stakeholders. CRT staff will need to develop consultation documents and tools, analyze the public record, and develop a regulatory framework. That work will be in addition to the proceedings.
You have 1 minute left.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Currently planned for 2022-23. and with the benefit of the allocation identified in the main estimates and budget 2022, the CRTC will be well positioned to achieve Bill C-11's goal of developing a new regulatory framework for online broadcasters, as well as Bill C-18's goal of a fair and sustainable Canadian digital news marketplace. I trust that very broad overview is useful for the members, and my colleagues and I would be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And what I will begin now is to do the question and answer. The first round of questions are 6 minutes, but that includes the answer. So we will begin with the Conservative Party, and I do not know who will be asking the first round of questions for the Conservative Party.
That would be me, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Nader. Begin for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for joining us this afternoon, as well as your counterparts from the CRTC. I want to follow up on something that you mentioned in your opening comment about Class 2 license fees. And just want to make sure I understand this correctly, is that effectively Class 2 license fees are a tax on broadcasters that goes directly to the government. The CRTC doesn't keep any of the Class 2 license fees, and that instead goes to the government's consolidated revenues. Is that correct?
Other than perhaps the use of the word tax, obviously it is meant to pay for the use of spectrum fundamentally, and has been there for a long time. But you're absolutely right. We collect it on behalf of the government, but it's a flow through and goes to consolidated revenues.
So effectively, if we were to eliminate Class 2 license fees altogether, that would be a benefit to broadcasters and would have no effect on the CRTC's daily operations or financial viability.
I assume companies would always prefer to pay less to government, and it would have no effect on our
and I think someone promised that in the last election. I can't remember who. But moving on, the CRTC 2022-2023 departmental plan gave some foresight into the work that CRTC would be undertaking in preparation for Bill C-11. And again, you've noted some of that, preparing for public consultations. Where some of our concerns lies that, CBC license renewals at 17 months, for example, it's been over 500 days now since the 3-digit suicide prevention line has been unanimously adopted in Parliament. I'm concerned where the CRTC is in terms of its staffing, its capability, its competency to implement C-11 first and then C-18. So I'm curious what timeline you see from the time that Bill C-11 is passed and received royal assent to when it is fully implemented. What's the best case scenario for the CRTC to have that fully implemented?
That's a complicated question. It's a fair one. And I can certainly speak to the time it takes for certain types of proceedings, but I understand the point of your question is looking forward. So one, it will obviously depend on exactly what is the content of the legislation ultimately passed by Parliament, and what might be the nature of any policy direction that the government puts to the CRTC. So those would be factors. What I can say is I have had more than 100 staff working in a series of working groups for well over a year to prepare. And to their credit, they've been doing this at the same time as their other work, and we have done a great deal of preparatory work. To say when it'll be fully implemented is very difficult. I think the first stages of setting up the broad parameters of the regulatory regime, who will contribute, who is caught, how much, what major definitions, those things should be done reasonably within a year. But there are many other more technical aspects. Transition, we have licenses, some for 5 years, some for 7 years. They will all need to be changed. There's a set of regulations that need to be passed that are beyond the control of the CRTC. So if I had to put a number on it, I think it could be fully implemented in 2 years.
Thank you for that. You mentioned policy direction from the government. In advance of C-10, well, I guess C-10 never did pass, but in advance of the committee discussions, there was a policy directive issued. Just want to confirm that you have not yet received a policy directive from the minister in relation to Bill C-11.
No.
You mentioned you had a number of working groups working towards, different aspects of this. One challenge that we've heard a lot of is the concept of discoverability and how that might be implemented for the major web giants. I was wondering if you could commit today, specifically on the concept of discoverability, as to whether the CRTs could commit that no Canadian content would be boosted up or boosted below other Canadian content. So what I'm asking is that if you could commit that no one piece of Canadian content would take priority over another piece of Canadian content, or lack priority over that.
I understand and appreciate the essence of your question, but I would struggle to simply respond using those terms. Obviously, we prioritize French language content, we prioritize Indigenous content, news, and so on. There are prioritizations, but we don't control what content broadcasters or platforms in the future put on. Let's be very, very clear about that. That has never been the role of the CRTC to tell firms, whether the public broadcaster or the private ones, what they should be putting on. My view or my explanation when asked to address when asked to address discoverability is really, it's about making sure Canadians are aware and have access to Canadian stories. And that is an outcome, and we currently have a variety of tools to encourage regulated entities to make Canadians aware, and we would do that in the future.
A few seconds left.
30 seconds, Mr. Nader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To that end, has the CRTC undertaken any analyses of the platforms as they are today in terms of their Canadian content, in terms of how they may promote or not promote Canadian content as of today? Has there been an audit or a study or an undertaking to see what is the state of play today of the major platforms?
We have been very busy gathering data, studying them, and I'm sure we'll come back to is the Commission qualified, which is a question I somewhat get a little more challenging about. We are studying it, not in terms of a specific percentage. We have not asked that type of data, but we have learned and met with them and learned a lot about how they already prioritize Canadian programming and make it available.
Thank
and
you
that's
very
fine.
much. Perhaps you can address that in the next question asked of you if you wanted to continue with that line of thought. The next person up is for the Liberals, Anthony Housefather, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you for your service. I appreciate the work that you've done, all of you, and Mr. Scott, thank you for your service as chairman. Recently, as you may recall, the CRTC was able to order the removal of RT from Canadian airwaves. And I think given what Russia was doing in the Ukraine and the use of RT as a propaganda arm, it was a good decision. Could you explain to us the process that you used to make that? How many, did you receive submissions? How did you use the act to be able to do that?
I may ask my colleagues to join in a second. So you're aware that we were, first of all, I should just stop by saying, obviously we're very aware of the circumstance and we were looking at the issue similarly, independently. The government asked us to examine whether or not their actions were consistent with the Broadcasting Act and set a defined period in which they wanted a response, and they have that ability to ask us to act, not to make a decision, obviously. The content of the decision is entirely up to the Commission as an arm's length agency. We did that. We issued a notice. We sought comments, and staff analyzed that, and we rendered a decision in a very short period of time, as we were asked to. But the circumstances were very clear, and the weight of the evidence told us that it was, in fact, not consistent with the objectives of the Broadcasting Act, and therefore they were removed from the authorized distribution list.
Thank you very much. I raised that because this was an issue that was raised last time when we were looking at C10. And so can I ask, if the government hadn't asked you to look at a channel in particular within a certain amount of time, do you have the powers to, for example, say, there is a Chinese state broadcaster, we're concerned about it, we are proactively looking at it?
We have, if I may take a quick step back, it's not that it's overly complicated. There are often comparisons made to Canada and other countries. The UK is one example. They license foreign services. We do not license foreign services in Canada. We authorize their distribution. In effect, the distributors, cable companies, and so on will come and say, Canadians are asking for a particular service, we'd like to carry it, and then it gets authorized. So in order to take it away, so to speak, we need to remove them from the authorization list. That has been a relatively rare occurrence, but is increasingly a concern. And we do have the ability, as we just did, and typically it would be driven by a complaint from the public or an enterprise, a person in a legal sense, registering a complaint, and then we would examine it and determine whether the matter needed action and got comment and ultimately render a decision. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, I think it was a very, very helpful answer. Madam Chair, how much time do I have left? Oh.
You have 3 minutes and 35 seconds.
Thank you very much. So let me come to C11 for a second, previously C10. There have been a number of people commenting in various places that somehow this bill and then the CRTC would choose to regulate individual social media posts of individual users on a non-commercial basis. Could you clarify whether the CRTC has that nefarious intention?
We do not. If I may just, by way of introduction, we have that jurisdiction today. Some might argue that it could be challenged in court, but the Act as it is written relates to programming delivered over any means, and we do not regulate it today. Most of those services are subject to an exemption order. The challenge for the Commission is we really only have two tools, and that's outdated. We have ability to license and the ability to exempt. And you can't license a non-Canadian, for example, so you can see we're very limited in what we can do. But the Commission's broadcast regulation is not focused on user-generated content. It's focused on the objectives of the Broadcasting Act. So what we are interested in is what will have an impact on the system. So more than 20 years ago, the Commission looked at this and said, services delivered over the Internet, their regulation would not contribute significantly to the objectives of the Act. They looked at it again a little over 10 years ago, reached the same conclusion. I think we could probably all agree that's not a reasonable conclusion now. It is a significant impact on the system, and that's why I've put that we need the flexibility in order to do that. But the focus is not on user-generated content. It is on the content broadly provided by programmers, platforms, Canadian or otherwise, and so on.
Thank you so much. I see I have a few seconds left, but I'll give that back to the Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Housefather. And I will go to the Bloc Québécois, Martin Champeau, for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here. Mr. Scott, I'm going to continue with what my colleague, Mr. Housefather, was saying. You were talking about the fact that right now the CRTC could regulate digital media, but it's not doing so. So does C11, as it's presented now, does it give you more power to do that, or does it limit your authority to regulate?
It's a difficult question to answer. It is absolutely necessary. If I can answer it a slightly different way, there are three elements that we have emphasized that we need. We need clarity about our jurisdiction. So there is an argument that it may or may not be covered. We need the ability to obtain data, and we need the ability to have an enforcement tool that matters. There are many other aspects, but those are the three fundamental things we need, and they are all contained in the legislation.
Il y a des critiques qu'on a entendues régulièrement.
We've heard criticism to the effect that the CRTC doesn't necessarily have the skills to to regulate the digital industry, but I imagine that you've reacted. Have you taken any measures, or do you consider that the CRTC is the organization, the ideal organization to regulate? Have you had to reorganize? Well, we are ready and we are capable. We are the agency responsible for broadcasting and have been so for 50 years.
It comes on. Broadcasting is what we regulate, and it is irrelevant whether it is delivered via, a TV transmitter over the air, par câble distributeur ou par l'Internet.
Dites-moi,
So tell me, you were talking about traditional broadcasting that you've been regulating for 50 years, and I don't imagine that you've been there for 50 years. But for several years, I worked in the field in radio and TV, the traditional radio and TV. I know that oftentimes it was very complex for broadcasters to appear before the CRTC for license renewals, for quotas, and these types of things. Have you often been told in the past by broadcasters that to impose, let's call these quotas because this is what we were talking about, that it was imposing on citizens what they could and could not watch? Have you been leveled this criticism? To your knowledge, is this an argument that comes? Hello, Mr. Champoux. You're talking about quotas or discoverability is what we call this today for content. And the CRTC doesn't choose what is the programming. What we're looking for are to reach some objectives. For example, a quota for radio or for TV, whether it be for local news, whether it be for Canadian or Francophone music programming. So this is what we do in our regulatory framework. But we don't choose programming. Yes, people can believe that we choose programming, but no, we don't. Yes, but over the years, because on one hand you have the broadcasters presenting their arguments, but there are also organizations representing musicians, artists, and they appear before you as well. Hasn't been demonstrated clearly to you that this system made it so that it kept our cultural sector to be dynamic and it increased their visibility? I can continue, but yes, of course, I believe that our system was built in Canada over the past 50 years, whether it be for the audiovisual market, our cable system, satellite, all of the Canadian operators that are online. All of this is built on a series of government programs that includes regulation coming from the CRTC. So there's a concern that's raised quite often, especially by digital businesses, are these algorithms. Oh, this is a state secret almost. It's an industry secret, these algorithms. I understand that it's sensitive, and these are tools that they have and that they use in order to have their business model. But if we're imposing objectives, we have to be able to regulate this. I know that when we talk about copyright, it was really difficult to obtain reports to try to check if objectives were being met. Do you think that you're going to encounter the same problems? Do you already have means to check and verify? There are objectives and there are algorithms in our position, and I think the President was saying we're not there to regulate algorithms or to change the algorithm, but we are there to make sure that the objectives of the Act are met. And so we want to make sure that there is Canadian content, that there is distribution, and that it is presented here and elsewhere in the world. And yes, I think that businesses are very focused on data. Do they want to share their data? Naturally, this is part of one of our requests to ensure that C11, it provides us with tools to obtain this data. And in the case where there's an issue of compliance, well then, we need to have mechanisms in place to make sure that we can impose penalties if we need to.
12 minutes, 12 seconds left.
Donc, on pourrait
So we can expect that these businesses will be very creative if they don't want to share their algorithm or give access to them to provide other means for verification.
À vous, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. And then I go to the New Democratic Party for 6 minutes. Peter Julian.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our witnesses for their presence today. I hope that everyone is well during these pandemic times.
Appreciate all of you being here today. You were quoted in the National Post as saying that if we were designing a regulating system today, quote, you would probably design a regulator differently. What did you mean by that? And are you referencing things like what you've just given us in testimony, that currently the CRTC has the ability to license and the ability to exempt? Is that part of what you were referring to when you talked about designing it differently?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Pardon me. Not specifically. The question, the context of that was about what were the accomplishments over the last 5 years and what were the challenges looking forward. And they specifically said, would you make major changes? And my point was simply, change will come incrementally. And we are absolutely ready to make the necessary incremental changes to implement prospective legislation. My point was simply, if you truly started with a clean slate, which is rarely the case institutionally, the world has changed dramatically, and you would probably start with a transport layer, facilities that are, on poles, at wires and spectrum and the like, and then you would have a service layer. That was simply the point was not that the Commission does or doesn't have the current structure, doesn't work, but rather the world has changed so markedly that if one started with a clean slate, you would probably design the agency differently. The statutes are what we fulfill, and that's in your hands. And whatever the statutes are is what we will address, whatever the structure of the agency.
I guess my question is, are the statutes adapted to the needs of
the Broadcasting
responding
Act
to
is not adapted, and that is, and the three principal areas that I pointed out are the ones that we are particularly concerned about. As I said, the clarity, the ability to gather all the necessary data, and enforcement tools to make sure people listen.
Thank you. So if we're talking about C11, you have referenced in terms of the timelines, potentially a couple of years.
I may regret that, but I've tried.
We will hold you to it. The aspects of financially, because we are talking about the estimates, what does this mean in terms of the CRTC from what you've looked at so far? And as part of that question, you mentioned launching public consultations around C11. What would that mean in terms of the CRTC reaching out to Canadians?
Wow. If I do the latter, it's so important that members and the public understand that we are quasi-judicial, and we're so we rely exclusively on the record of proceedings, and the key to that is to get quality interventions and to reach out to all Canadians. And in fact, part of that work I was talking about, preparatory work, is also studying and exploring ways that we can reach out to all Canadians better, racialized communities, Indigenous peoples, those who have traditionally perhaps not paid attention to the regulatory agency. So that is part of our regular work. In terms, I've lost the first strand of your question.
In terms
financial
of the resources, financial end and public consultations.
So financially, the government gave us 2 years of funding to implement C10, now C11, to do the preparatory work. We had the first year's funding, and we will receive the second year's funding shortly, I anticipate, and that is adequate to do the preparatory work. Thereafter, there will need to be a review of the precise budgetary requirements, but it will largely get collected from the fee payers. That's why I described the regime. So yes, we have the necessary funding to do the work we must do right now.
Okay.
I don't know if I've answered your question well.
Well, you've answered it well, but not specifically.
Okay.
And perhaps
I'll try.
that is something, if internally the CRTC is putting together a scope around public consultations and has financial estimates, perhaps you could provide that to the committee after this appearance. I'm going to move on to, because there's lots of
I will
questions
just
we
say
have.
we don't do that, but I can come back to that if you would. In terms of we will put out notices, and that is how we do business, and then we will make determinations whether there's a public hearing required, a paper process. There'll be numerous notices, but our budgeting is one envelope, and then we do what we need to do to fulfill our mandate, and that's part of that is running those proceedings. But we have the resources to do that.
Okay, so we talked about enforcement. We've talked about the web giants and the issues of things like algorithms and discoverability. I mean, obviously they're linked. So what are your thoughts in terms of achieving enforcement if there is not cooperation and if there are lines in the sand that we've seen from some of the companies, for example, around algorithms, which are an issue worldwide? We have bills in front of the U.S. Senate that touch on this whole issue of algorithm transparency because of obvious implications. How does the CRTC approach that?
So not specific to algorithms, but enforcement. We have this on the telecom side. You make regulations, you make rules, and they must abide by them. And if they don't, we have the ability to proceed with administrative monetary penalties, and that's what I envisage us doing on the broadcasting side. Right now, ultimately, the only tool we have is to withdraw someone's license, which is a crude and ineffective instrument. We will have the ability to, we'll call it encourage, parties to comply with our regulations because we will fine them, so to speak, using administrative monetary penalties.
I would encourage us to wrap this round up, please. Time is up. And then we're going to move into a second round. And I think starting that round is for the Conservatives for 5 minutes. Kevin Waugh.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just on the topic of Bill C-11, I see that part of what's in front of us with regard to these estimates is an increase in spending allowance of 5.5% in order to bring those amendments into play with regard to the Broadcasting Act. Now, in talking about C-11, do you find it odd that the terms program or programming, which give the CRTC the ability to regulate, of course, are not clearly defined in Bill C-11?
I mean, they're defined, and I did not bring one of our legal counsel with us today. Scott, you may want to add to this, but they're defined, so to speak, as well as they are in the Broadcasting Act today.
Oh, okay, so you would take the definition that exists in the current Broadcasting Act and apply it to the new Bill C-11?
Depending on the ultimate content of the legislation, I mean, that's in your hands, not ours.
Okay. And so are you comfortable with the amount of discretionary power that would be put in your hands with regards to Bill C-11 and regulating programming?
To be honest and sincere, yes, we are. We're a regulatory agency. We're an experienced, if you will, overseer of the broadcasting sector. And it's a successful sector. And I honestly and earnestly don't accept the criticism that we're not prepared or able, because it's simply it's not true in
But
my view.
Mr. Scott, there is a new chair being searched for right now because that is deemed necessary in order to modernize the CRTC. Is that not correct?
No, with respect, there's a new chair being sought because my term ends in September. It's a 5-year term.
But it has
and
been
no-
stated by the minister that it's necessary in order to see the modernization of the CRTC. It would
I'm not
seem
quite sure
then
how-
that the
how to
minister
add-
sees a
I'm
need
not
for the
gonna comment on the
reform.
minister's terms, but my term was always to end in September of this year. To my knowledge, no chair has ever been reappointed in the history of the CRTC. And it is the government and the minister's right to begin the process to find a new
Mr.
head
Scott,
of
I'm
the
just going to
CRTC.
continue here. Now, the Bill C-11, it does, in fact, leave it open with regards to user-generated content being regulated by the CRTC. I recognize that there have been arguments against this. However, Dr. Michael Geist has said, quote, the indisputable reality is that the net result of those provisions is that user-generated content is in the bill, end quote.
Yes.
Jeanette Patel from YouTube Canada said the draft law's wording gives the broadcast regulator, in other words, you, scope to oversee everyday videos posted for other users to watch. Scott Benzie from Digital First Canada has also said that while the government says the legislation will not cover digital first creators, the bill clearly does capture them. So all of these individuals are individual users generating content. It would appear that the bill does or could, in fact, capture them, correct?
As constructed, there is a provision that would allow us to do it as required. But if I just quickly respond to the general tenor of those comments, that's all true today.
So
we could do any of those things
my
today
question
under the
for you then
Broadcasting
is,
Act.
isn't the point to modernize? And so therefore, why would we keep that so broad by keeping 4.2 in the current legislation? Why wouldn't we remove that?
With respect, it's not our place to make recommendations about the definitions in the legislation. What I would answer is that there should be a higher degree of trust in relation to the Commission's future actions, and it's demonstrated by, as I said, 50 years of broadcast regulation. We have never interfered in individual content.
But I guess what we're faced with here, though, today, and you discussed this earlier, is that, the CRTC traditionally exists to, or that the Broadcasting Act looks to oversee a very scarce resource, namely radio and television. The internet is not, there's no problem with scarcity. There's an endless amount of websites available to an individual. Any Canadian who wants to set one up can. And so, in my estimation, then, why would we need the CRTC to make sure that certain content gets forced in front of Canadians versus others? I mean, you said earlier that part of the CRTC's role is to make sure that Canadian culture is celebrated or that content is put in front of Canadians.
Can be found.
But that's if TV stations and radio stations are limited, so you have to give a certain percentage to French or Indigenous, et cetera. But we don't have that problem with the internet. So how is this a modernization?
The modernization is that it will allow us to deal with broadcasting, whatever form it takes and whatever form it's delivered. It is, as you've just pointed out, a very significant portion of the broadcasting system today.
So do you feel that people don't have adequate access to different resources on the internet right now? It's up to you and the CRTC to determine what they should watch?
Not at all. And again, I would take issue with the premise. We're not regulating the internet. We're talking about regulating broadcasting, whatever platform it comes on, in order to achieve the objectives
What
of
is
the
broadcasting?
30 seconds, please.
The definition of
We're
broadcasting.
back
What is
to
broadcasting?
your first question as defined in
No, I
the
asked
current
programming.
Broadcasting
What's
Act.
broadcasting?
Well, it's defined, broadcasting, the objectives are set out in Section 3, and then...
Are you
and
telling me
then
that as the chair of the
Commission's-
CRTC, who has a renewed term, you cannot define the very basic thing that is your job? What is broadcasting?
Time is up. I'm sorry. We
Wow.
have to go to the next witness.
Competence.
Ms. Thomas.
Thank you.
Badgering the witness is not a necessary part of questioning. Let's be respectful to each other. The next person up is for the Liberals is Lisa Hefner. For 5 minutes, please, Lisa.
Like school in the summertime, no class.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to really thank the witnesses for being here and putting up with our questions. I would like to take you back to, you've touched on this a little bit already, but the CRTC saw massive changes in broadcasting over the past decade or so. And I'm wondering how the CRTC, if at all, was able to pivot with any of those changes as more and more broadcasting went online. What was the CRTC able to do in order to deal with those changes and still fulfill your mandate?
It's a great question. It is a challenge because of the uncertainty and the limited flexibility that we have, having only a licensing power. So we've certainly kept track of it. We do data analysis. We're aware of the role, but the big impacts have been on the regulated entities, on the Canadian broadcasters whose business models have been fundamentally changed because they're losing subscribers, they're losing advertising revenues, and so on. So the focus, I would say, has been to assist them in fulfilling the objectives of the Broadcasting Act. And you know, a question was, or a note was made earlier about how long it's taking to do these CBC's license renewal. Part of the challenge with that is exactly that, operating in two spheres. And we can issue a condition of license with respect to the traditional sector, but no condition of license with respect to the platform, the distributed via the internet. So those are big challenges, and that is why we need the flexibility that is offered by the proposed legislation.
And just so we're all clear around the table, I know it's a basic question, but why do we need a CRTC in Canada going into the future?
Well, you need one. Take a step on the I assume we're referring here to broadcasting. On the telecom side, it is predominantly economic regulation. On the broadcasting side, it's predominantly public good regulation. And you will not achieve the objectives of the Act absent a regulatory framework that encourages it, whether it's through incentives or whether it's through, which should be the case more, I hope, in the future, or whether it is through prescription. Without it, you will not achieve the results. We will not have original French language content. We will not have Indigenous content or racialized content because economically it doesn't make sense in a North American market.
Thank you. And I believe I understood from your opening statement that you feel, from your experience, that Bill C-11 and C-18 are necessary in Canada. Can you go into that a little bit more?
As I said, for C-11, the necessity is that we need modern tools. The entire, if you will, broadcasting ecosystem has changed. The traditional model, if you wish, a walled garden, you can come in the garden and here are the rules for you to participate. Well, that's no longer the case because there's a whole bunch of platforms which are wonderful and are offering Canadians a plethora of content that they're consuming, with vigor. But we've now created these asymmetries and we don't have the tools to address that and the changing marketplace. On remuneration, it is a question. News is the most costly element of broadcasters' productions. It is a challenge, as you all know, in terms of the printed press. Their advertising revenues have largely gone to those platforms. And the government clearly is seeking a way of ensuring that they receive remuneration for it, and our role will be to establish the regulatory framework to allow that to happen, hopefully largely through commercial negotiations.
And if you have any opinion, I'm wondering you can share about why it's important to have local news and broadcasters in Canada.
Well, no one would know that more than in this room. If you don't have reliable sources of news that are trusted by Canadians, that have the ability or wherewithal to cover local and regional and national issues, as well as provide international coverage, providing ethnic programming, but from a perspective of Canada and not simply a foreign perspective. I mean, these are all critical elements to a functioning democratic society, and I can't say that there's anything more important in what we do than the support of news.
Thank you. If with another minute or so left.
No, you don't have another minute. It's a 5-minute round, Ms. Efner. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to go to Mr. Champoux for 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I find the debate today very interesting. The questions and comments are very relevant. Mr. Scott, we have two important bills under study. One is before the committee, and another should between now and the end of the session, and that would be C-18. Before going into the details of that bill, I was wondering if both bills are passed between now and the end of the session and are before the CRTC. These are important for their respective industries. How much time do you think we can expect so that the CRTC's work with regards to this legislation will be completed? C11, I already give an estimate. Approximately, for C18, it's more difficult. First of all, I'm going to switch into English.
The development of regulations as a statutory instrument, and the timing of that is not in our control because it has to go through justice. So I can't easily estimate how long it will take to do the regulations that we need to do to establish the framework. And C18 is very new. We're just getting our heads around it.
Donc on comprend qu'il y a...
So we can understand that there's urgency around C11 because the industry is waiting. So C11, or rather C18, now eligibility of businesses. If I understand C18, it's in order to protect the local news, especially. We know that this is a sector that's been heavily affected by the pandemic, but also the fact that large platforms are sucking up all the advertising revenue. But the size of the business is a criteria to be eligible, to be recognized as being able to negotiate with the web giants. So the smaller media who are having trouble, especially in isolated regions in northern Canada, in Quebec, how can we think that C18 is going to help for regional news coverage if the smaller media outlets are not eligible given their size?
Admissible. Part of the role of the CRTC will be to identify who would be or should be the recipients, and where they may have more of a challenge is reaching a commercial agreement. I mean, it's a hypothetical situation, but one assumes that the larger news organizations, and this is evidenced in Australia, for example, are the first to reach a commercial agreement. Smaller players may have more difficulty, but that's where the regime allows for arbitration.
Selon ce que vous avez vu,
the Commission will be able to assist in that regard.
Mr. Champoux, I think we have ended your time period. So I will go to the NDP, Peter Julian, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to continue on the same questioning as Mr. Champoux with regards to C18 and question of finance and public consultations that you're expecting to have. But what can we learn from the examples that we've heard from the situation in Australia? And what are your thoughts? What are you looking at with regards to local media? Because in New Westminster, Burnaby, we've lost half of our newspapers. And so this is throughout the country. So what are you looking at in order to make sure that local media have a capacity and are able to negotiate? And one last question. What is the timeline? What is the timeline to reach the end of this process?
To add, I mean, the essence of the legislation is to provide remuneration. So unless I'm misunderstanding the essence of the question, that they need, with that remuneration, they will be able to invest further in local journalists and.
J'ai parlé plutôt de l'impact financier sur le CRTC.
Oh, I was talking about financial impact on CRTC. Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. So
the monies identified in the budget, I believe, will be sufficient. I mean, we're not. There are elements to the legislation that are remains to be seen exactly what the final form will be. Things like a cost of an external audit, I'm not sure that we have been able yet, since it's only been a matter of weeks since we saw the legislation, would know the exact cost. But the idea is that the approximately 8.5 million, will allow us to put the regime in place. Thereafter, it will be paid for by the participants.
OK.
Through cost
les trois autres questions, consultation publique.
Other questions, public consultation, the lessons learned from Australia, and lastly, how to ensure that local media are looked at in a reasonable timeline.
We always do it through
I'm sorry,
public
we have
consultation.
12 seconds left.
We have
Mr. Scott, if
public
you can answer
consultation
in
is
that
how-
time.
Pardon me, Madam Chair. We will use public transparent processes. That is how we regulate. And parties will be able to assist us developing that record on which we'll rely to set up the regime. And raise those
Thank
very
you.
concerns. Yes.
Thank you. I now go to Mr. Waugh or Ms. Thomas, whomever is the person up for the Conservative Party. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again. Let me get my head around this. The CRTC has never regulated newspapers. Never. In 53 years of CRTC, you have never regulated newspapers in this country. Right. Now, with C-18, you're going to be asked to regulate newspapers for money because of the internet. I've been a broadcaster for over 40 years, and when I heard this, it was like, whoa. And you made a statement, Mr. Scott, that said, you know, without the CRTC, there would be no Francophone content because it does not make sense economically. So, and you also talked about Indigenous. And yet for broadcasting, I would say the French and the Indigenous have been shortchanged for 53 years of radio and TV in this country. Thank God we now have APTN that has filled some of the shortcomings in this country, and I can't
created by the CRTC.
The long and should have been
mandatory carriage.
Exactly.
Demanded by the CRTC.
Exactly. But why are you looking after newspapers? For 53 years, you have not. That wasn't your mandate, and this shouldn't be your mandate to look after newspapers in this country.
So, my understanding of the intent of the legislation is not for us to regulate newspapers, certainly not the content or publication or distribution, but rather remuneration. And even at that, we are there, as I understand the model, to deal with situations where there's a failure to reach commercial arrangements between the suppliers, so to speak, of news and those who are redistributing it and profiting from it. So our role will be to set up those regulatory parameters in the face of situations where commercial negotiations aren't successful.
So really, totally outside today your realm of responsibility.
Well, no, I mean, you just pointed out broadcast news, which we've been regulating for 50 years, is news, and that is part of it. And it is a challenge for Canadian broadcasters to properly fund and support news. We also do a great deal of mediation and arbitration in all sectors, but particularly in broadcasting, largely between distributors and suppliers of programming and those who distribute it. So we have extensive experience in both areas.
So when you look at the broadcasting field today, has it failed under the CRTC that we have less stations, more black stations, dark stations that have just simply turned off the radio dial? less people in newsrooms in this country. So when you leave in September, do you look back the last 5 years and said, God, we have lost X number of radio stations in this country. We have lost hundreds, if not thousands, of broadcasters in this country. So when you leave at the end of September, what do you say to your leadership on the CRTC when we see in this country today, and I'm part of it, local news, Lisa was part of it, that is diminished to next to nothing in this country? What would you say to that?
I would fundamentally disagree with the premise of your question.
How can you say that? The numbers support what I have just said.
If you'll allow me to try and answer,
Yeah.
I'll try and answer. So first of all, hundreds of stations have not gone dark. And in fact,
Radio stations have.
Very, very few stations in Canada have gone dark. And the fact of the matter is the Canadian broadcasting system is quite successful.
It's successful when you turn on a radio station for 6 hours and the rest is satellite for 18 hours of the 24 hours. In my city of Saskatoon right now, there's 3 announcers at one station. They do a 3-hour shift, then they go ahead and do Calgary radio. Then they do voice track for Edmonton radio. That's successful?
1 minute.
Or do you even know that's happening in this industry right now?
Thank you. Yes, we're quite aware of what's happening.
So what are you doing about it?
Would you like us now to regulate the content? Is that effectively what you're saying? So effectively, now we should determine...
Mr. Scott,
now
you are in charge.
No. We, as we said earlier, no, we do not tell broadcasters what to broadcast.
You give them the license, and if
Yes,
they don't
to
follow
operate.
the license, you should be able to step in on a 5 or 7 year deal and say, look, I didn't get my news out of Toronto and Saskatoon. Global Saskatoon should have a TV station servicing the community of Saskatoon instead of getting my news out of Toronto at 10 o'clock, which they say is local.
The regulated firms have to respond to and abide by their conditions of license. The conditions of license are set when they're granted their licenses, and we enforce them.
You may want to continue that thought with the next witness. It will depend. For the Liberals, for 5 minutes, Mr. Biddle. Chris?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Would you like to continue that thought, Mr. Scott?
If I've answered the question, we set conditions of license when we license, whether it is radio or television, public or private. Those conditions are public, they're published, and they're enforced. We don't add to them or change them midstream. We take complaints, we review them comprehensively when the licenses are renewed, and we enforce it through those license conditions. Sorry, Scott, did you want to add something?
Yes, and I think having chatted with Mr. Waugh about the situation in Saskatoon a couple of times at committee here too, I think that's what you're referring to. Since that time, the Commission has taken certainly a lot of actions with respect to local television news. It's undeniable that the revenues of these stations have been declining over the years and that the market has changed. We cannot generate those revenues for them, but what we have ensured and what we have put in place is through the, certainly considering the companies and their ensembles who've introduced a group-based licensing approach so that we can look at all of their revenues and ensure that they make contributions to all of the markets across the country. We have imposed specific requirements
Thank you, Mr. Hutton. We have some timelines here, and so I would...
Point of order.
Yes, I'm sorry. Who raised the point of order?
I know as people asking questions, we don't necessarily have a good sense of how long we've been going, but I don't think that was 5 minutes.
Mr. Biddle, I apologize. Mea culpa.
Point of order is a minute and a half.
I had you on. No, I had you on the 2 hours, 2.5 minutes time slot. So you have another 2.5 minutes left. I'm so sorry. It was my fault.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was wondering if you could discuss the Independent News Fund and what the CRTC is doing with respect to that.
Mm-hmm. That was probably where I was going with my previous responses. We've also found ways to ensure that smaller stations, independent stations that operate in markets that are not the major metropolitan markets, receive a contribution, and this is essentially paid by distributors that help subsidize local news, and there are requirements for them that are imposed on them to ensure that they deliver upon those requirements. And so we have created the Independent News Fund, which contributes about $20 million a year towards those objectives. We've also ensured that part of the BDU local contributions, or the cable company local contributions, that there is some flexibility there that also allows for another about $60 million to be essentially contributed towards local news in the major markets that the large companies serve.
With respect to what Ms. Thomas talked about, the endless supply of websites, and I do agree with her, the internet has an endless supply of websites, but would you agree that in terms of how Canadians absorb their content, there really is only a handful for which is a bulk of what Canadians consume, and in many cases we have monopolies or near monopolies in those types of products being produced?
I appreciate the sense of the question. I mean, obviously there are certain platforms that are dominant or much larger than virtually any Canadian domestic player. But I think that's not the issue. Ms. Thomas is right. Canadians have access to an absolute plethora of content, and that's a good thing. No one is disagreeing with that. We did the report, Harnessing Change, I guess, going on 3.5 years ago. And that was one of the first points made, that we are in a wonderful situation to have, sources of both entertainment, news, sports, and so on from around the world. But fundamentally, the Broadcasting Act is about ensuring that those Canadian stories get told, distributed, and found. And perhaps that's the definition of broadcasting that Ms. Thomas was looking for, rather than a technical one. I'm not sure.
Okay.
10 seconds. Chris?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask questions.
I'm sorry for making that mistake with your time earlier.
No problem. That was.
Mr. Shampoo for 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Scott, Part 2 is one of the concerns, represents one of the concerns of broadcasters. And this is one of their concerns in the sense that we're talking about regulating digital companies. And traditional broadcasters feel that they have very heavy obligations, and licensing fees are part of this. If there was a proposal to make in C11, if there was an amendment saying that fees would be abolished in Part 2, how could this shortfall be managed? How could this be compensated? Would it be enough with the new funds generated by the contribution of online companies? What I would say is that when we're talking about licensing fees in Part 2, as my colleague, Mr. President, was saying, these funds are directly sent to the government. So it's a question that really should be asked of the Minister of Finance and the Minister of the Heritage. It's a source of revenue. We are an intermediary. That's our role. So you don't really have an opinion. It's not really something that would have an impact on the way. No. Okay. When I began, I was speaking about C18, and you were saying that you were starting to wrap your heads around C18. I imagine that you have studied it enough to speak to the eligibility. I started to talk about eligibility earlier. There's been a lot of requests from businesses who say that they are business, that they are news outlets, but they feel excluded because their coverage is more specialized. For example, consumer magazines. That's just an example off the top of my head. Do you find that the This is defined enough in the bill, or do you have a margin of maneuver to allow businesses that might be more niche, that might not be within the description? Answer, we are beginning our analysis of the new act, but I think that there is a general definition that says that it talks about general news. I think that this specificity is found in the act at the current time, or the bill, and so this is the objective. So over time, with processes, it will be up to us to define very clearly what is general, but honestly, in our analysis right now, we're talking about traditional news as we understand the news to be, and less information or consumer news, for example. There are different programs also within Heritage that has to do with magazines, other forms of publication that are funded by these programs. I think here what we're interested is the news, because the news was never funded before. Yes, but it's opened the door to many different types of businesses, content creators, specialized content creators that say, well, we have the same problem, and we are our ad revenue is being sabotaged. So don't you think that this bill could have been even broader?
Time is up.
C'est pas notre rôle. Nous, on réglemente.
It's not our role. We regulate.
Sorry. I'm going to have to go to Mr. Julian for 2.5 minutes, and then
point of order, Madam Chair.
This is ended.
Point of order, Madam Chair. It's Mr.
Yes,
Nader.
Mr. Nader.
I think we've kind of got out of the rotation of the question. I believe I didn't want to interrupt Mr. Shampoo during his questioning. I would have felt like I was photobombing his questions, but I think I do think that it should have gone to 5 minutes of Conservative and Liberal before going to the 2.5 minutes for Bloc and NDP. I'm happy to carry on with the 2.5 minute round and then come back to the 5 minutes for the Conservatives and Liberals, and maybe if the clerk could just clarify that. I just don't want to see our members lose out.
If the committee is cool with that, I am fine to go for another 10 minutes after Mr. Julian is finished, because we do have this room for an extended time to move into business. Thank you.
Okay, that goes to me, Madam Chair?
Yep. Yes, it goes to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to follow up on questions you didn't have time to answer last time. First off, what are the lessons that we can pull from the Australian example around C18? Secondly, how to ensure that local media really benefit? And thirdly, how do you see, in terms of the process, negotiation, mediation, final offer, arbitration, how long is that period? Expecting that there is not necessarily a lot of cooperation from the web giants on that.
The best way for me to answer that is I have had considerable dialogue with my Australian colleagues. I'd suggest that their news environment perhaps is simpler than ours, certainly more concentrated than ours. It appears, quite successful in driving players to commercial agreements, but a lot of the work that remains to be done is, if you will, preparing the sword in case negotiations don't work. So they haven't had practical experience yet with arbitration, how long it takes, as you described, where commercial negotiations fail. So we don't have a lot of information about that yet. We do know it well from the broadcasting side in terms of our mediation and arbitration. Mediation goes on a long time, but that is because we're trying to avoid arbitration. Once we actually engage in arbitration, the processes are fairly efficient and straightforward. It's final offer arbitration. Put in your best offer. We choose one.
Yeah. So how long is that process? If you're a local newspaper in Burnaby, how long is that process?
We can only use our current experience in the broadcasting, where we do have set standards of service, and it is in the realm of, I can't remember exactly, but it's a number of days. It's either 55 or 65 working days.
for
50
final offer arbitration process.
So if 55 or 65 working days from the outset of negotiations to final offer arbitration?
No, for the
From-
final arbitration process.
Okay.
So when there's a conclusion that a deal cannot be reached in our domain, then it moves to final. One of the parties would claim and ask for final arbitration, and that's when it starts ticking.
Thank you, that's helpful. But for the mediation process then, what is the ballpark the CRTC is looking at?
As long as the parties are making progress. It's not time delimited in that sense. And obviously, the legislation speaks to legitimate efforts to reach agreements. But that our experience on the broadcasting side is mediation can take a long time, particularly if they're making progress. If they don't make progress, it's shorter, and one of the parties moves to ask for arbitration.
So you're
And
looking,
arbitration.
would it be fair to say, looking at a 6 to 8 month process, negotiation, mediation, final offer arbitration?
I think it will vary depending on the complexity, the size of the players. First premise of the legislation is hopefully that there will be very little arbitration, that most of it will be driven to commercial agreements.
The chair has been very generous, so I'm just going to come back on that, and that is.
No, I'm not going to let
Oh, no,
you
she's
be.
not. You spoke too soon. Sorry, Mr.
No,
Gillian.
I'm sorry. You have ended. I'm sorry. And so now Mr. Nader asked, because I goofed. I'm sorry, I was distracted and I goofed on this round. So perhaps we can have Mr. Nader and then a Liberal, and that will end this particular meeting with the CRTC.
Okay, Madam Chair, thank you. It's going to be Kevin for the Conservatives here. Mr. Scott, you said broadcasting has been a successful sector and it's for the public good. So the CRTC, I think, on the Rogers Shaw, the initial one was, and we're only going to talk the broadcasting. I'm not going to talk about the spectrum and all the industry. I'm just going to talk the broadcasting. Did you think it was a good deal?
The issue for the Commission in our policy is whether or not the transaction ultimately makes a positive contribution to the objectives of the Broadcasting Act. As with the concessions, if you wish to call them that, that we drew from the participants, yes, otherwise we wouldn't have rendered that decision.
Yeah. Does it bother you that the Competition Bureau, on the other side, the industry, did not like the deal? And just for your sake, we also submitted in Parliament, we did not like the deal. The Heritage Committee did a study on Rogers Shaw, and the chair presented it on Tuesday in the House of Commons, saying we did not like the deal between Rogers and Shaw, just to be upfront.
I'm aware of that. I did look at the recommendations.
What did you think of those recommendations?
Well, I mean, the committee heard witnesses and formed a view. A number of them relate to prospective proceedings. Then we don't deal with things in theory or hypothetically. We'll deal with those as they come. But the fundamental view that there's not enough benefit, I disagree with. It is fundamentally a horizontal merger on the broadcasting side. The parties did not compete directly with one another. So the issues were largely related to how do you ensure that independent news, independent broadcasters would be successful, measures to protect programmers because of the increased size and market power of Rogers, protections for local news, and so on. And we did address those.
Yeah, I think around the committee, we thought that, to be honest with you, Rogers did cherry pick with extra resources, people in Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, even here in Ottawa, but no resources for the middle or lower class stations like Halifax, Peterborough, Lethbridge, Kelowna, Saskatoon, Regina, and so on. And those are the stations, and you've mentioned that here, that, those are the ones that are really in trouble in this country right now. It's not CTV Toronto. It's not CTV Calgary. The ones that are in deep trouble right now, and I'll tell you, I worked at CTV Saskatoon. We have a stringer now in Prince Albert. We once had 85 people in Prince Albert. We had a television station in Yorkton with 50 people. They have one person now. Swift Current is dark. And this is in my time, in my own province, I've seen it. So you can see why I was really concerned, in this case, for a global/chorus, because I can see what's going to happen to the so-called middle and
But
lower
as
class.
we indicated, so you are speaking about global, Chorus's property.
That's right.
And Chorus will not receive certain funding. And we've indicated in that decision that there will be a review of the availability of further funds. Because if all of the money went to Chorus, that would be a very negative outcome for some of the smaller players who are currently deriving a significant benefit from the fund. And that will be reviewed by the Commission. We'd indicated that in our decision.
Thoughts on 4 months left? It's kind of, I mean, we're hitting you with 11 and 18 and Roger Shaw, and yet you got one foot out the door. And
Not at all. And that would not be a good description of how I view my role.
1 minute.
And certainly in the coming months. No, the institution. I regret the focus on the chair. To be honest, it's the institution. We have almost 650 excellent staff. They do the analytical work. They identify those questions. They help us produce the record upon which members make decisions. And they will continue. I have 8 other colleagues. They are all, in their own way, contribute significantly. But most importantly, frankly, staff who are
30
the
seconds.
experts will continue to do their work no matter who chairs the commission.
would you like to see a change administratively in CRTC, since you seem to be the one that gets the credit or the bouquets? How would we change that? Or would you?
I think that's just a lack of understanding of how the commission works.
Okay.
9 members make decisions
Yeah.
on the advice of expert staff, exclusively on the record of the proceedings.
Good. Thank you, and all the best. You will see it probably for C11 too.
I certainly hope
Yeah,
so,
thanks.
because I think perhaps we only scratched the surface of some of the committee's concerns, and we'd be happy to return and speak to it at length.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Waugh, and thank you, Mr. Scott. The Liberals have ceded their place, and so I want to thank the CRTC and all of the executive who came to present to us today. You kind of had a little bit of a tough time, but thank you very much for the information and the goodwill that happened today. And so I would like to thank you, and the meeting will suspend before we move to the business meeting. Thank you. Glitch that didn't just move us nicely through this space. So now we are into a business meeting, and we have unfinished business, and so we have to decide as a committee how many meetings we will dedicate to public hearings with witnesses. We also have to set a deadline for witnesses, which I think we had been discussing as being this Thursday. If you have already sent your witnesses, then it would be up to the clerk to tell me if she is missing a list of, or still need to get a list of witnesses, which I will ask her in a minute. Clerk, go ahead. Do we need to get a list of witnesses from anyone? Have you received all your witnesses?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I haven't received all my witnesses, and Mr. Julian has his hand up.
Peter?
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've already submitted our witness list.
Witnesses are concerned, I think. We had an initial conversation on Monday. It seems to me that 20 hours of witnesses is a good start. I don't think anyone would object to that. My suggestion being that they be in 5-hour blocks, so 4 meetings of 5 hours each, including, I would suggest we use the break week so that, because of course with translation, it is a lot easier during break week to find that space. So that's what I wanted to put back on the table. There seemed to be generally a 20-hour witness list seemed to be a compromise that folks were okay with. So I think that would get us started, certainly, in terms of witnesses and get us started in terms of C11.
Mr. Julian, I will ask the clerk to comment on this, but I don't know that we can get 20 hours of meeting in the constituency week next week. It all depends on the availability of resources and rooms. So maybe the clerk can tell us what we may be able to accomplish next week.
Sorry, point of order, Madam Chair. So it was 5 hours. I was suggesting Tuesday, Wednesday next week, 5 hours each of those 2 days, and then the following Monday and Wednesday.
Aha.
Yeah, so
right.
10 hours next week, 10 hours the following week.
And if I may be so bold as to translate, 20 hours is the equivalent of 10 normal meetings. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Julian?
Yes.
Thank you. Clerk, what does it look like for the for the break week, the constituency week?
I have it under authority that the services are available to provide meeting time between the hours of 11 and 4:30 on Tuesday. I believe it's May 24th, and Wednesday, May 25th. So again, so there'll be 2 meetings from 11 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Pardon?
Thank you, Chair. Are those the only 2 days available? Have we explored other days in case members couldn't make any of those 2 days?
There are other days currently being explored. I'm told Thursday is quite full, but it will take another 24 to 48 hours before we have a response from the services as to whether or not they could accommodate alternate days. We do know that we have Tuesday and Wednesday.
Oh, okay, thank you for that. Obviously, this is not something that we can decide on until you get that information. Yes, clerk.
Mr. Coteau had his hand up.
Yes, Michael?
Yeah, just a quick question in regards to 4 meetings. So does that mean the actual, like, can we accommodate 2 5-hour meetings past the constituency week? Would that be possible? Like, it just seems like a big time slot. Is that easy to do? Or is it possible
Clerk?
to do?
It's not easy, but the clerk can tell you if it's possible.
I wouldn't be able to tell you if it's possible. If you speak to your whips and they determine that that's what's happening, then that's what will happen. Beyond that, no, we don't ordinarily sit outside of our time slot.
Okay.
Thank you. So basically, what we are told is that we could have from the clerk 2 blocks of 5.5 hours, are they, clerk? On Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, and you are exploring other days in case those days are not acceptable.
For the constituency week, yes, it is 5.5 hours. I believe there's the understanding that we will be taking a half an hour break in order to give the interpreters a moment. So more of a health break in between. So it would be 5 hours of sitting over 5.5 hours.
Thank you. And so, Mr. Julian, you are talking about the following week that we get back. If there is an ability to also make up another 10 hours during that week, it's my understanding, clerk, to do so, we would have to have extended hours onto our time. And I don't know if you have explored that and what you found.
Point of order, Madam Chair. I should just mention before you go to the clerk that I know that the whips are working on supports for interpretation because that's been a problem. I think it's quite likely that will be resolved by the time we get to the first week back after the break week.
Thank you, Mr. Julian, for that information. Because I think, obviously, we will have to try and find a time that is acceptable to everyone else. But the question of devoting an equivalent of 10 2-hour meetings for public hearings, and to do so within 2 weeks would be what Mr. Julian is suggesting. So if I don't hear any yes, clerk.
And Mr. Nader had their hands up.
Sorry, pardon?
Mr. Champoux and Mr. Nader.
Champoux, okay. Yes, Martin?
Madame la Présidente, je ne sais pas.
Madam Chair, I don't know to what extent the information of the clerk is recent. The information I had received in the past hour is that the periods available next week, well, were already reserved by other committees. There's the Finance Committee that will sit all of next week, and that I was told that to try to obtain 5 hours, a 5-hour time block would be impossible. So I think we need to have the most updated information. But what I've understood is that the available time slots are disappearing and are perhaps already gone.
Perhaps the clerk can respond to that.
I had confirmation from my manager earlier this afternoon that those spots were reserved for us. I haven't heard any different.
Clarifying again the Tuesday and Wednesday spots for 5.5 hours each. Thank you. Okay, so does that answer your question, Mr. Champoux? Thank you. We have John.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to members of the committee for their insights so far. I think maybe taking a few of the issues first. I think in terms of the deadline for the witness list, I think that's entirely reasonable. I don't see any reason we can't have. I think we can have our witness list in by the end of today, frankly, tomorrow, yeah. So I'm not concerned about that. I think we can go ahead. In terms of Mr. Julian's suggestion of a 20-hour witness, I think that's reasonable. I think we can work with that. We'll see what happens, towards the end of that period. I'm trying to be reasonable, so I think 20 equivalent of 10 meetings is reasonable. I'll leave it at that. I'm a little hesitant about devoting the equivalent of 10 hours on a constituency week next week. Speaking for our members on this side, we made commitments in our constituencies. We are in the middle of we're ending up a 4-week session. We have 4 weeks after this. So I know for example, I know our colleagues have commitments in our ridings, many school visits, which can only happen on so many days, the school said, and nice to see that they're happening in person again. But I would be hesitant to commit ourselves to 10 hours during a constituency week. If we can find the resources during the following sitting week, I think that's would be preferable from our point of view. But to ask the other three members of this committee to give up and to cancel what they've already got planned, or to ask non-members of this committee who may not have a background in terms of what the legislation will be, I think that's asking a lot. So my preference would be, and again, we'll see what other people think, but if we could maybe see rather to do this during a sitting week. But I think it is reasonable if we can go longer meetings, and I think Mr. Julian has made a kind compromise, and I think if we can work towards something on that, I think that's reasonable.
Just to clarify, so you are agreeing with a deadline for witnesses by tomorrow, Thursday,
Sure.
At what, 4 o'clock Eastern time? Yes, that's fine, and I understand that the clerk, and she can clarify that for me, has a list of witnesses from the other parties, and would the committee like that list to be shared? If anyone opposes that idea, we'll go ahead and have the clerk share the list that she has and then add Mr. Nader's list by tomorrow at 4. Is there an opposition? Seeing none, then I think we have accepted two very clear things. The only thing we need to discuss now is Mr. Nader is suggesting, or John is suggesting, that he couldn't do 10 hours next week. Again, this is something that the committee will have to discuss, how they do this, because we have now had the clerk tell us that she has managed to confirm Tuesday and Wednesday for 5.5 hours, half an hour being the break in between for, I gather, change of interpreters, etc. So we do have a bird in the hand. I don't know about the following week, what we will get if we try to find the equivalent hours in that time. Because again, what we're seeing, as Mr. Shampoo pointed out, is a great deal of many committees trying to grab whatever time and resources there are. So that's one of the reasons I would like us to make some decisions today, because then if we snooze, we will lose the ability to get any extra time at all. So I would like to hear this discussed. Clerk?
Mr. Julian had his hand up, Madam Chair.
Peter?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly understand Mr. Nader's concern, but we do have these spots available. We do have interpretation lined up. We know that, and we've heard from, I think, all four parties, that there are witnesses that are eager to come forward. So I don't think that time frame is unrealistic. I myself will have to adjust my constituency week accordingly, and I probably will have people in my caucus that are replacing me from time to time. But it seems to me if we don't start with the blocks that are already available to us, just given what we've seen over the course of the last few weeks, particularly on Mondays and Wednesdays, I think that's just delaying the legislation until the fall. And it seemed to me that, as people have pointed out, we need to jump on this, hear from the witnesses, make decisions around C11. It would seem to me that the best way to do that is to take two time slots that are already available to us. And in my case, if I absolutely can't change local events, I'm going to make sure I've got a good replacement who's been well briefed, who's available to ask the questions of the witnesses. The witnesses have been waiting for some time to come forward. I think we should accommodate them. We've got these spaces, so let's start next week when we have that availability, so we can get a jump on this and finally respond to the witness need.
Thank you. I am entertaining discussion on what Mr. Julian has just said. Clerk, yeah?
Mr. Wall has his hand up.
Kevin?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So Tuesday, I have eye surgery I've been waiting for the last 6 months. So that's not good for me, because when you schedule, as you all know, as specialists, it can take 8 to 12 months, so it just happens. Tuesday's my day, but I understand. I just couldn't make Tuesday, I'll be honest with you. After surgery, I am not to drive, I am not to look at a computer screen, and so that would not work for me, but I am one person in this committee.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other hands up, Clerk?
Mr. Julian has his hand up.
Peter?
I'd just like to move, Madam Chair, then through you, that we have the 5-hour meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday next week to start things off. The witness lists are submitted. The witnesses are eager to appear, so I would move that.
Thank you. So there is a motion on the floor. If anyone wishes to discuss this motion, please raise your hand or speak now. I can see the floor and I don't see any hands raised. Yes, Clerk.
Mr. Nader has his hand up.
John?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do have to push back a little bit about doing 10 hours worth of meetings next week. Our roles as parliamentarians are multifaceted. We have commitments here in Ottawa, we have commitments legislatively, and we have commitments in our ridings. I just have a real trouble. I'm not saying that I'm opposed to any meetings next week. I think we can be reasonable, but to devote 2 days worth of meetings, 5 hours during, the busiest times of the day when we have commitments with. My own schedule is meetings with stakeholders, visiting school groups, doing that role as a representative in our constituents, and dealing with the casework that's been piling up for the 4 weeks that we've been here and the 4 weeks upcoming. I don't think it's practical for us to do that. So I'm open to a compromise on that. I don't want to see us not move forward. I mean. We have witnesses. We want to hear from them. I know we all around this table want to hear from them, but I would much rather see the bulk of this discussion take place during our regular sitting weeks when we have time here blocked out. We've been planning for this constituency week for many weeks. That's like Mr. Waugh said, we have medical appointments, we have family arrangements, we have family commitments. I have 3 young kids, and they have. They need people to get them on and off the bus when my wife is working as a nurse. There's obligations there, and so if we're willing to have half-hour breaks while I run down to the bus stop, and if we're willing to have half-hour breaks while I prepare the youngest some cheesy noodles, as she calls them, if we can make something work, but 5.5 hours straight with a half-hour break for interpretation changes. I just can't commit to that on behalf of not only the 3 members here, but the members that are going to have to give up their own engagements that aren't on this committee. So I just can't commit to that, and I don't want us to have to leave this committee without having made a decision. I don't want to do that. I want to be able that we can move forward. I don't want to be here talking about this for the next 2 hours. That's not my. I see some staff looking surprised about 2 hours. I said that metaphorically. So, but if we can come to a compromise, I'd be willing to entertain that. I just, for the sake of our members, for the sake of families and work commitments in the riding, and perhaps, Madam Chair, if you'd be entertaining an opportunity just to suspend for 5-10 minutes, if we could have maybe some discussions offline here. Among different parties, so there might be a compromise we can come to if it's worthwhile. If it's not worthwhile, then we can discuss it further, but if we're willing to have a discussion.
Point of order, Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Julian?
Yeah, I think we should take a cheesy noodle break.
All right, then we will suspend for 5 minutes? We only have an hour left, actually, John. We don't have 2 hours left.
Voilà.
Can begin because we don't have very much time left in this room and we need to get some of this work finished. So Mr. Julian was the last person Mr. Nader was the last person with the floor. So if we have an ability to get an agreement on these meetings, public meetings with witnesses, I would love to hear that right now from someone.
Madam Chair, Mr. Nader has his hand up.
John?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And there is an eagerness in the room to get going. I believe it's Niagara Day on the Hill, so I don't want to keep Niagara Falls from waiting. But I'm going to. I think we've come up with a compromise, so I'm going to state what has been agreed to, and if I stated anything wrong, Mr. Biddle will throw a computer cable at me. But we've agreed that we will have our witness lists into the clerk as soon as possible, but by tomorrow at the latest. We would like to do a 1-day 5-hour meeting on Tuesday of the constituency week. And there's agreement that the Tuesday meeting would be on autopilot, so that it would not be acceptable to move motions or during that meeting. We would then request that the clerk, at her very best resources, to then schedule meetings in that first week back to the best of her ability to have the remaining meetings that week, whether it's 5 hours on Monday or 3 hours and 3 hours, or as this isn't in a good motion form, but I think the direction is hopefully clear on that break week back. If that's
Well,
I didn't say break. Sitting week, Madam Chair. The sitting week. So for a total of 20 hours of witnesses.
I'm just clarifying. We do have a motion that has not been voted on the floor. So that are you amending that, Mr. Nader, John?
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Nader is offering a friendly amendment, which I accept. So the friendly amendment would be, I'd said 5 hours Tuesday, 5 hours Wednesday. We are eliminating the 5 hours Wednesday, so we'll say 5 hours Tuesday on autopilot. And then the following week, which is May 30th, 31st, 1st, and 2nd, up to 15 hours of committee time, preferably Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday evening, or whatever the clerk finds available in that period.
So you are suggesting the 30th when we return, the 30th, the 31st, and I didn't get the last one?
The 1st or the 2nd, so of those 4 days, preferably 5 hours Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or whatever the clerk can scrape up, hawk, find, steal over that period.
You kind of cut out there, Peter?
Sorry. So I propose Tuesday 5 hours on autopilot. That's May 24th, and then May 31st, 1st, 2nd would be up to 5 hours according to the availability of rooms each day.
All right, and so is everyone in agreement with this? Or anyone in opposition with this motion? Can you tell me if there's anyone? No? Well, then it would seem that this motion has passed. And there is, which is good work, guys, very good work, very good will as well. I just wanted to say I don't know, because only the whips can say whether or not we can get 3 days in 1 week of 5 hours each. It's going to be up to the clerk, and so we will just go with that at the moment. And so this motion passes, obviously. And so, as I said, congratulations, goodwill, good work. But the next thing I have to find out is we need to have at this meeting on Tuesday witnesses. And so my question is, the clerk will be working on Thursday with what she's got to try and move forward. And I was wondering if the department would be one of your first witnesses. At least that will give us witnesses for a certain period of the time while the clerk works on what she can get. Any opposition to that idea?
I think Mr. Nader had his hand up, Madam Chair.
John?
I was really just heckling, but it'd be nice to have Minister Rodriguez there as well. I'm sure he would be eager to join us and present on his bill. So
that may be so. We'll have to see. One cannot tell what ministers' schedules are like, but if the minister can come, great. If the minister cannot come, shall we just go with the department officials? Is that acceptable to everyone? Just a plan B.
Mr. Shampoo has his hand up. Mr.
Martin?
Oui, je pense que
Yes, I think that there seems to be unanimous, a consensus here. If we're able to have the heritage officials and the minister, great. But if the minister cannot be there, we would be pleased to have the officials. There seems to be a consensus in the room.
Thank you. And so, if I may just recap. Yes, Amy?
Mr. Biddle has his hand up, Madam Chair.
Chris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We sent in a list of prioritized witnesses, and I know oftentimes it's usually officials and minister first. We're proposing officials and minister last as the final witnesses after all of the testimony that's been heard is our list. I don't believe the minister is available on Tuesday, but he is eager to appear before this committee.
Thank you, Chris. So we have, just to recap, we have a deadline of Thursday, tomorrow, at 4 o'clock Eastern time for anyone who has not submitted witness lists to submit them. We already have quite a long witness list, and I think that, and some of them may be actually duplicating each other, but I think the clerk would send you those lists for you to look at. Mr. Biddle said that he has sent in, the Liberals have sent in a prioritized list. So I think if we all agree to those things, then maybe the clerk can begin on Thursday to try and get witnesses in. But if she cannot, because don't forget, Monday's a holiday and talking to people on a Monday would be pretty difficult, but I know she will do her best to get hold of witnesses and bring them in. And so we will then be meeting on Tuesday for 5.5 hours with a half-an-hour break. No meeting on Wednesday, no further meeting during that constituency week. And then on the following week, we will have extended meetings, which is Tuesday, May the 2nd for 5 hours. Tuesday for 5 hours when we get back, and we're going to have May the 31st, the 1st and the 2nd for 5 hours each. And that is up to the clerk's ability and maybe Whip's ability to try and find us that time. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
And thank you very much. And good work, everyone. I really am so proud of the way everybody worked well together. Thank you. Have a good whatever's left.